Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Alan.
And welcome to Dice Over Everything, the miniatures gaming podcast.
All right, so I don't know. I was just going and getting groceries this morning, and it came to mind there's probably a few things I'm buying that are kind of already in the fridge, but they've turned old, and I should probably throw the old versions out. But I haven't, and I didn't this morning. I don't know. Do you have that same sort of thing going on with your fridge, where
Yeah, and you try to carve off just enough so that you can get as much as what's left that you can still take, and then you just carve, but you have too much food in there, so you just carve off a little bit, put it back in the fridge, and the next day you carve off a little bit more because it continues to go bad.
Oh no, I just avoid the whole thing. It's just the whole thing sits there unused. It's not going bad.
Okay.
If it was actually bad, I'd get rid of it. But it's just questionably old to the point where I've just bought a new version, and I just haven't used the old one anymore. But the old one's not bad per se. I just would never eat it.
I could not fully relate then.
Oh, okay. Maybe we'll have different opinions on this topic we're coming up with for today, because it's kind of along that line.
That's true, about when you should actually walk away, specifically in this context, from miniature games.
From a particular game, yeah. So we've walked away from games before, so I don't think this is totally foreign to us.
Yep.
But I don't know. So do you want to go over... This
is almost like the most important, besides actually getting into games.
Yep.
Walking away from games has done the most to change our view of how we experience miniature games, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think some of the times
it's almost like the split between eras in our miniature gaming hobby.
Yeah, and I don't think we went and philosophically evaluated why at the moment we were leaving the game. It just felt like the thing to do at the moment. Does that sort of your view of the previous games we've played that have fell out of circulation? We didn't assess it on any level. It's just sort of I think we often just started trying something. For the most
part, yeah.
It felt like we just started trying something new, and that new thing just kind of replaced it. But obviously there's a reason why you start going out and looking for replacements.
That's not true for everything, but that is somewhat more true for me than you, I think.
Oh, okay. All right, so
maybe that's what you felt like, but that's not how it seemed like to me, based on the things you said about the games we walked away.
Yeah, okay, I think we did fine. I think we were having issues with them. Yeah, okay. We were probably having issues with them, which is why we went searching for new ones.
Yeah, and I think it's also different on how much investment you've had for those games that you walked away from. Mm-hmm. I think there's two main games that we really that made the most impact. That's why I mentioned the fact that it's such a big deal, because of how into those games we were at a certain point.
Yeah. So,
and you know those two games. You can mention them.
Yeah, everybody I think who's listening to this podcast probably knows these games. They were Warhammer 40K and Warmachine / Hordes. Two big games
that we spent a lot of time playing. I think Warhammer was the longest, actually. We started playing that. That's how we got into miniature gaming, the miniature gaming hobby in general. We started playing that at 12, literally 12, I think, because you bought that starter set for my birthday. So maybe you were a little bit older, but for me, it's at 12. We're okay, I guess we're playing 40K now. And we walked away at what age?
I think around 25, 26. You kept getting a little more, but I think, maybe longer. No, I kept playing with some of
27.
Our other mutual friends, so probably more like 27 for me, yeah.
Yeah, so I came back from living in overseas, and I was overseas I didn't have any miniatures. So I was totally out of the hobby for quite a few years. And then I came back and I'm I love this hobby. Let's get back into 40K. And I said, hey, Brando, you want to start new armies? And so we both bought new armies. But in the meantime, I was searching for a place to play. And that's when I got into Warmachine at the Friendly Troll. And I eventually finished my orc army. You never finished that army you bought.
The Dark Elder army? No.
Yeah, the Dark Elder army. Do you still have any of that?
No, I liquidated it. I had barely any loss. So,
Oh yeah,
because
oh
40K
nice.
just appreciates in money. So if you have it still boxed in plastic, you just sell it off at like.
Well, that was before. I don't know if that still happens
No,
because
I think
that
there's
was
more
during the time where 40K was really, or Games Workshop, the company that owns 40K,
Mhm.
was really putting the screws to its customer base, where they basically just reboxed the same thing except with less guys in them and sold them for a higher price.
Yeah, and I think they were putting the screws down on like the distributors and like the stores, and they wouldn't let them list prices online and stuff like that. So if you were just listing your own stuff on Kijiji, you were better than a store almost, because you could give people prices online anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess that was the first thing. And I guess before we get into how those, like the general concepts of this, I did want to talk a little bit about these two. So for 40K, why did you personally feel like you walked away from 40K? Is that the one where you're saying it just kind of drifted off?
So,
Like,
so what I did before this is actually write down, like rather than the negatives, sort of the positives of why you would want to play a certain type of game, and like just how it fits with the sort of gaming you're interested in doing. So that one is sort of the reason for leaving that, like the game just being unwieldy. I think that's why it left 40K. I'm just trying to think of what the counterpoint of what would bring you into a game would be. The opposite of that, which would, I guess, then be accessibility of a game brings you into it, because like a low barrier of entry. So I guess thinking about what would actually get you like to want to play a game, I guess there's the accessibility of it, where you say, okay, I can just get into this thing, give it a try easily. So there's that, which we talk a lot about skirmish games that have that. The other reason to get into a game I think of that, I guess you sort of mentioned that in terms of like finding a store that was playing Warmachine, would be the community aspect. Like if you're someone who just wants to like share the hobby, wants to just have like make a social event out of it, maybe the actual game itself doesn't matter to you so much, but just having a good community to be a part of might bring you towards a particular game. So that's two things. The third aspect that might get you into a game is you enjoy competition. So maybe you're not a sports person. Maybe you're like, I spend too much time on the computer. You don't want to play video games. So like this miniature gaming hobby has some cool competitive ways to play it. Maybe you get into a game like because it's competitive. And then the fourth one would just be a creative output, because you put all your ideas into like the painted army, into like building your forces. It's just like there's a huge creative outlet you can find in many games. So I think those are the big four like things I can see that get you into a game. And I guess if the reverse starts happening, it could push you out of it for all those four aspects.
Okay, that's an interesting way. That's strangely somewhat positive for a negative thing. Out of character for the ways you think about things in general, I feel like. Although technically you're saying this thing doesn't have any of the good things, so it's still somewhat negative, but yes.
Our whole topic is the negative things, so I mean, I'm just like putting a little nice fresh sandwich meat in between the moldy buns to go back to where we started. Okay,
so when you look at that, I think I would add, I guess there's certain things that are, those are four aspects that you would get into a game. There's a couple of things that I would like to talk about that is outside of the four main aspects, especially in the ways that you can recognize the fact that some of these things are not necessarily there for the way that you're experiencing the game.
Yep.
But let's go with that for now. So when we walked away from 40K, I think before we go into the specifics about what the actual problem was, the emotional response of walking away, how did it happen? Like, tell me a story about like why did you feel like you walked to, like, personally how it came about?
So
from leaving 40K.
I think maybe it was just because meeting up with the community, aka the small group of friends I was playing it with, just became less viable because they lived pretty far away. Some of them, like their life, they ran out of time between jobs, family, and stuff like that. So they started playing it less. So I think it was just the community, I guess, even though the community is very small. I think the community I was playing with
still, it's very
shrunk.
Important.
Yeah, it shrunk, and being very small already, like you and I could have played, but that's not quite like a wider community thing going on anymore. And I guess a new community popped up of the Warmachine players, which then replaced it. So I don't even feel like it was all about the game, really. I feel like it was about the existence of one community versus another.
So there was nothing wrong with 40K. It's just we started joining this other community and they played Warmachine and we ended up starting it and we really enjoyed Warmachine. And then so it kind of just subsumed the time that we would normally have spent to play 40K or work on 40K models. We were putting all of that energy into another game. And so this other game was like, after, at least this is actually exactly, the way I felt, right? Like, and I don't know if this is exactly the way it happened with you, but like, for me, I didn't even mean to stop playing 40K. I literally went to that store. I asked them if they played 40K. One of the guys there, AY, said, "Oh yeah, I play 40K, but generally I play Warmachine. You want to try it out?" I played a demo and I'm like, "Oh, this is pretty fun." And then he showed me a couple of models and I was like, "Oh, these big beefy warjacks from Kador look awesome. Sure, I'll buy some." And then I enjoyed the models, enjoyed the different look from my normal Eldar army and my orcs that I was painting. So I just started playing that. And then, I started showing up for every week. And I think you also did. You wanted to dip your toe, try something new. And then I just never got around to going back to play 40K. Right? It just every week, because they had a regular thing, people were there, you played this game that I started enjoying. Just little by little, that the Warmachines just started taking up more and more of my time. And then when I wanted to buy a new model, instead of painting, playing or buying new 40K stuff, I was buying Warmachine stuff to build for my armies.
Yeah, like if there was a Warhammer community at that store, maybe it would have competed for your interest. But just because it didn't exist, it like pushed you out of the game because something else was drawing you in for that aspect.
Yeah, it wasn't. There was still. I guess there's people that played and that liked it, but you're right. There was not the same type of community, right? Everyone played Warmachine at that time. So even though some people also played Warhammer, right? That was not the main thing that people went to play. And this was during the heyday of Warmachine, where Warmachine was starting to threaten to take over probably Warhammer Fantasy. But it was challenging Games Workshop in North America at that time in game stores. It was kind of crazy that happened, right?
Yeah, like the size of tournaments were bigger than GW often.
A lot of new players were going and picking up, and you're like, oh, if you look at that, if you're a business person and you look at that graph of uptake, you're like, oh my God, if this continues in 5 years, everyone's going to play Warmachine instead of Games Workshop. Spoiler alert. If you live in the present time, that obviously didn't happen. They obviously plateaued way before they were able to challenge Games Workshop truly, and they kind of cratered now. But there was time when that was like not crazy to think that Warmachine would overtake Games Workshop. Also, Games Workshop was doing badly and kind of going down at the time too.
Yeah. So in the middle.
So you don't think the fact that Games Workshop was getting worse was an actual factor about us walking away from it?
I think that might have influenced other people, which caused the lack of a community at that moment. I mean, I played a lot of 5th edition, which, I mean, sure, there's lots of broken parts of it, but I guess at that moment it had moved on to 6th edition, which I didn't even follow it into 6th edition. So it must have, I guess, just problems with the game must have pushed people out of the game, which then damaged the community aspect. Like it was a chain reaction effect. I don't know if you know more about what was wrong with 6th edition that really pushed people out.
I was out of playing miniature games for probably at that point at least 5 years. Like we I think I bought the 5th edition codex. I never played 5th, and I definitely didn't play 6th. I think I played one game of 4th or something like that. Oh wait. Maybe I didn't play 4th because maybe I just bought the codex, or no, bought the rule book. Did we ever play 4th against each other? Because I literally at that point only ever played against you and the other guys.
I think we might have played it, but so rarely didn't make an impact that we were still just dabbling.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so I had been out for like 5 years at that point. I have no idea. All I know about 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th is now by when I went back and like read Wikipedia and listened to podcasts about what people thought about those editions. I have no idea. When I say that 5th edition was the best edition of Warhammer 40K. I just assumed that because so many people say that 5th edition was the best version.
Yeah, that's what I was.
I don't know if that's true.
But I do want to like look into what people's answers are about why they didn't like 6th edition and why they think it really drove people away from the game. Because like I didn't get the direct effect of it. I got the collateral effect of the community being damaged and then not bringing people like me back in when I was looking for games.
Yeah, so I think for 40K, I think the biggest thing is just the community. It's like, and I think that is probably in general the biggest reason to walk away from a game, depending on what you're in for, right? Mm-hmm. But oftentimes, if you're in for playing a game, but you have no one to play with, there's a good reason to not play that game and walk away, right? And not continually hope that you can find people to play with, assuming you can, find another game that you want to play, right? That said, a lot of people, play, quote unquote, play 40K, but have never actually put their miniatures on the table because 40K is a really big hobby, and you can still be into 40K without ever playing the game, right? And if that's what you like, if you just like assembling models and painting them, you can stay in there, right? And you can continue to do that, and you don't have to move on, right? It only matters if you have that, feeling, right? Mm-hmm. And I think with 40K versus Warmachine, the biggest issue was just time, right? It's not like we hated 40K at that time. We didn't know how bad 6th edition was. We didn't even play a game of it. But we just, you only have so many hours in the day, and then a small subset of that is for miniature gaming. And then you can't necessarily have time to play both these like games that are, especially these demanding games, 40K and Warmachine. So you just choose the one that, you have the community, you have the enjoyment, you have all those kind of things, and you go with that. And it's okay to, leave those other games behind. You don't, just because you have those models and you've played them and enjoyed them, doesn't mean that you have to continue to do that.
No, not at all. All right. Can I bring this into the present with something that works for us that might not work for some other people, and then maybe we'll go back to the Warmachine era?
Sure, man. This is an open form podcast. I want to talk about Warmachine, but you got something you're pressing? Go for it.
No, I think I want to just move on to possibly what might be the opposite of the community being damaged effect. So currently we play... Oh,
I see why you want to talk about this first before Warmachine. Go on.
What? I don't know. Maybe we will. Maybe we won't.
Maybe I'm wrong. Okay. Go on.
All right. Let's see if you've already guessed what goes through my brain. So we currently play a lot of Infinity.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Infinity's great. Great game.
Yep. And we have a pretty good community going on. Like the whole Toronto area where we play has a couple of different Infinity communities. So if people who live around various parts want to play the game, they have a community they can come and play at.
Yep.
But we've seen lots of people who sort of show up. They try the game for a little bit, but then they end up bouncing off of it. Mm-hmm. What would you say? Like, obviously, those are people who bought the miniatures. They started learning the rules and all that, but then they felt like they had to leave. What do you think, made those people leave? Like, obviously, we're not all the same, and we're not interested in the same sorts of things in games, which is why I listed those 4 different aspects and what you might be interested in. But what do you think, put them off of it? Typically, they could all be different, but...
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that's walking away from the game. I think that's not even getting to the game at all, right? Yep. Like, when I think about walking away and the topic that we're talking about, to me, it's like you've actually gotten into the game, the game portion, and then you've decided, this is now, that time is over and you move on, right? Mm-hmm. But in some ways, you're right that, if you've bought these models, you painted them, you show up, you play a couple games, and then you realize the game is not for you, right? In many ways, that is walking away because, you don't have to, like I was saying about 40K, you don't have to play games just because the miniatures are there for playing, right?
Yeah, and
a lot of the fun of the hobby is just the first half where you assemble, you think about games, and then you paint your miniatures, and then you look at them on your shelf or whatever on the battlefield, and you're like, yeah, this is awesome, right? Mm-hmm. And if you end up not liking the game, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's enough to do the first half, and you're like, you know what, the second half is not for me. And then in that way, you kind of walk away, right? And you maybe there's another game that fulfills all of those things, that you enjoy the first half, and then you also enjoy the playing of the game. Then it's fine to walk away from the one where you only enjoy half of it.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know how this fits into any of those other categories, but you think the game just being too demanding for what they're looking for? Like, I'm trying to think of how to categorize it. Like, obviously, I don't want another demanding game on top of Infinity. Like, I'd be like, well, it's too demanding, and I already have this game that demands like lots of knowledge, a huge knowledge base to feel like you're getting into the game. So I can see if I tried another game and then I realized that, which I would hope I'd look into it beforehand, but you don't always know. That I guess just the level of like the level of play difficulty almost.
Yeah, to me, this is like the same thing of what happened with 40K. It's just the amount of time you have, right? When there's certain games and there's different games require a different amount of time investment to get the full payoff, right? Like we talked about this before about secondary games and primary games, where primary games can often be very deep and very rewarding in terms of all the different things that are happening and the experiences you get, but they might require a large time investment for them to get to that enjoyment level, right? Yep. Something like 40K, Warmachine, right? Specifically 40K or Age of Sigmar, these are huge. Like the investment is a lot of it is in. There's a lot of institutional knowledge or whatever game knowledge that you need to know, but also just the size of the armies means that you have to have a huge time investment to even play or enjoy that army, enjoy that game. And if you want to change your army, that's a huge investment to try to switch over because you have to paint up like 100 models or something like that, right?
Yes, I guess you could say the accessibility in 40K is low from the sort of getting your models on the game table standpoint and from just the rules familiarity standpoint. Whereas Infinity, you can get an army on the table pretty quickly, even though they're really detailed miniatures. It's low model count, but the rules level, the rules has like a fairly big hurdle to jump over to like get yourself all the way in the game.
Yeah, and especially with people as as your responsibilities or your other time sinks grow as you get older, right? Sometimes if the game is not giving you enough enjoyment for the time and effort you put into it, sometimes you just have to just cut it out. It's not a terrible thing, although it feels terrible if you spend a whole bunch of money. Like it feels a lot worse if you bought like a new 40K army that has like $500 or $1,000 and then you're like, turns out I don't have time, inclination, or desire to do this, right? But it's the same kind of thing, and it's the same kind of thing not just for miniature gaming, but any kind of hobby, right? For me, I don't really watch movies that much anymore because the enjoyment and the inclination of sliding that into my time just doesn't fit, right? For now, right? But at the same time, just like miniatures, I think this is one thing is that just because you don't feel like it right now and it's not right for now and you kind of walk away from it as a hobby or whatever, doesn't mean that it's gone forever, right?
Yeah, like if you found you
can always come back.
If your friends, aka like your community, got into it, maybe they drag you back into it, and then you just get the enjoyment of being part of that community and like sharing that with them. So yeah, you can look at any sort of hobby that way.
Yeah, this is not what I thought you were going to talk about with
no, I didn't think you thought I was going to look at Infinity from that perspective, but it was the kind of the opposite end of the field from getting out of 40K. Anyhow, so do we want to roll back to Warmachine?
Yeah, let's go back to Warmachine and see how that transition happened. So Warmachine is slightly different in terms of how we walked away from that game.
Yep. So Warmachine has a fairly high level of competitiveness, which is one of those aspects that can turn people on games or off games, and
get people obsessed with them.
Yeah, if you want to be really competitive, like games that can be really competitive, you can get really obsessed with those if you like that. Yeah. And I think we only fell like halfway along that spectrum with wanting to like have a real competitive experience in our games, like at all. And I don't know if the community evolved towards that or what it was, but I just felt like the game started being really demanding competitively to have to just like
It
study
went,
and
yeah,
build things that I didn't necessarily want to paint. But to feel like I was playing the game properly, I would have to buy and paint like 3 of one type of miniature.
yep. And not just 3 of 1, like 3 of 1 unit of miniature, which means sometimes there's only like 3, 4 sculpts in that unit. So
Mm-hmm.
you're actually every unit you're painting already 2 or 3 models, and then you're painting 3 units of it, right? So I do feel like I think the biggest thing in general with Warmachine was yeah, it was no longer the thing of the it was no longer the hobby that we got into hobbying for because of how competitive it was.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go to tournaments, it's kind of paradoxical in some ways, right? We still go to infinity tournaments, so we love tournaments, right, and stuff like that, but more for the community aspects and the playing aspect. When you're so dedicated on the winning and competition aspect,
Mm-hmm.
that's not really what we ever really enjoyed, right? With the game, it was the sharing of this, this game and the experience of the miniatures and the stories they're playing out, and the enjoyment of playing with people or a whole bunch of different people that are really into the hobby and game that you're into, right? And so for Warmachine, because it was so dedicated to competition and because people started ratcheting it up, it got to the level where people would tell you, like, why are you even using those units? They suck, right?
Yeah.
And once you're at that level, other people are trying to help you actually, right? These guys are trying, they're not being malicious and they're saying, oh, you're a dummy, right? They're saying, I want to help you. I want you to win more, right? So don't
Mm-hmm.
use those units. But that's not the reason we played. Like we bought those units because we liked how they looked. We liked all these different aspects of it. We wanted to see how they did. We wanted them to be perhaps even just like being special and different, right? And for a community to be so dedicated to something entirely different from what we wanted, it's definitely fragmented the community, and it definitely drove a lot of people away. And it also, I think, really stopped Warmachine from being able to recruit new players.
Yeah, so I think that also basically like that caused a lowering of the ability for like the creative outlet, because
Mm-hmm.
like one of the reasons to get into the game is that it could be a cool creative outlet. But then
Mm-hmm.
when the game takes such a hard turn to ratchet up that competitive aspect, we started losing the creative aspect of it. So like
Mm-hmm.
you in theory could have done that creative bit, but you were clearly
No
playing the
one,
game wrong.
but you had no community.
Yeah,
That's
then
the
you would have no
thing, right?
community if you did that. So
And I think that, we talked about before, the reason we moved away from 40K was because we started, joining this Warmachine community. But then we kind of, as we continued on, we realized that not the 40K, the Warmachine community was no longer the community that we wanted to be, I guess, not necessarily wanted to be a part of, but that we fit in, right? So, like, we actually wanted that to be our community. It's just it didn't fit with the ideals and the things that we really enjoyed. And there were so many people who only cared about winning, and it was very frustrating because some people would. This is crazy, actually, in some ways. Some people who were playing the game were like, when we had a conversation about our store, because we were like our community was dwindling because these people who cared about competition kept on driving away casual players, right? And we had a conversation about that, and some of the people who are into competition were just like, no, we don't want people who don't care about competition.
mhm.
So it's fine to drive them out from the store and crush them at the very first game before they even know what's going on. That is a perfectly fine way, because we only want tryhards who will get into the game because I don't know, like who don't like getting taught, and
Yeah.
who would rather be thrown into the deep end and then somehow survive and continue on. And that was, when that happened, I was actually quite shocked, right? to be fair, they were quite young, and also they killed their own community, so they were obviously wrong. But yeah, so that was a wedge. And I guess for us, when you're talking about just walking away from a community, sometimes when you or walking away from a game, you kind of sometimes you just realize, you don't like or you don't enjoy the game for a while, and you're wondering why, and you look back at it and you're like, well, it's because the thing that you liked about it is no longer the thing that the game is, right? Games during times, they have life cycles and they change.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to list those different aspects of what you can get out of a game, and Warmachine is kind of like this interesting illustration of how the game itself can actually shift from one of those aspects to a different aspect, even though it looks like the same game.
And it's a little bit interesting because technically they never stopped supporting the more casual aspect of the game. It's because they would have event nights where they're just fun events or events like supported by Privateer Press. Like they're saying, we have special events I think every Halloween they had a special packet where you're supposed to play that with special rewards, right?
Yep.
Just the community that ended up championing the game didn't care about that stuff and drove it to the hinterlands, and then the company, in some ways, I guess, in some ways it makes sense, right? They wanted to back the people that were their most ardent customers, but the most ardent customers were creating a community that was hostile to new players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it hard to evaluate exactly what the game did to cause that. Maybe it's just the game started growing to such an extent that the balance between certain things became so swingy that if you played with the good units versus played with the subpar units, if you're playing with the subpar, you'd just be wiped off the board as if you were hardly even playing the game. So maybe in other games,
power creep kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe in other games where the power creep isn't so big or where they keep balancing a bit more under control, it lets people still keep being creative with their armies and putting suboptimal things on the board, but they're not so below par that you're going to be just wiped off the board. So you feel like you still get that.
Yeah, in some ways the game was so big that you could optimize armies so highly that you could wipe away people really, really well who did not have optimized armies. And I agree that was definitely an issue, right? In some ways that's super fun. That's one of those things with Magic that people love, right? Being able to optimize that. And I think Warmachine probably attracted a lot of players who like Magic because of that. But what I was saying about the community thing is that, in some ways just like Magic, right? You don't have to play, technically you don't have to play competitive Magic, but if all of your communities around you only play competitive Magic, you have to play competitive Magic, right? It's not just about what the game is, it's how the game, how it's actually played, right? And so sometimes, and this is one of those things, is sometimes you walk away from a game not because there's anything necessarily intrinsically wrong with the game. Not saying that Warmachine didn't have any problems. There was lots of problems, right? And that encouraged it. But our communities, because community was so important in the reason why we continue to play, and we've put so much time into miniature games. When the community was something we didn't want, we walked away, right? And that was the right thing for us to do. But that also doesn't mean that if you move or you go to a different community, you might actually find that you don't have to leave the game, right? If Warmachine or if we had just found people who played the game like we wanted to play, it's very possible we could be still playing Warmachine today. Okay, it's not possible, but
no, not with how the new sculpts look like in fourth. I'm like, that now hinders the creativity.
Okay, fair enough. The modern Warmachine has walked away from the things that we like from games, but we could have played it for way into third edition if our community was different, right? And our community enforced it itself, or we just found a community that was different. And so it's one of those things, right? Walk away because the community doesn't work for your thing, but keep your models maybe and look for different communities before you decide to fully walk away.
Yeah, that is one possible way. I've never seen games really turn it around and bring people back, except 40K. 40K actually seems to be able to keep bringing people back
so
in.
Big, yeah.
Exactly.
It's because it was so big. It's like the 900-pound gorilla.
Yeah, but very few other games seem to be able to like come back around and around and around.
Actually, there's a bunch of 40K games that seem to have been able to do it.
Oh, Games Workshop games?
Yeah, like Warhammer Fantasy is coming back.
It doesn't come back yet. You can't say it's going to work preemptively.
Okay, sure, but maybe that's just because of the video game. BattleTech came back.
It did, yeah.
And it's weird because
it's not even very different, is it?
I don't even think the video game is the reason necessarily. Like the video game definitely helped it survive, like the different video games. But this latest trend of BattleTech coming back, I'm like, where did this come from?
What brought this about? I don't know.
Because I liked the video game, the BattleTech video game from Harebrained Schemes, but I don't even think it was that popular. So I don't know.
All right. Can you think of other games that we didn't play that died spectacular deaths that are worth looking at from an outsider's view?
I think there's other games that we walked away from.
There's X-Wing, but
Yep, X-Wing.
I can do that one really quickly.
Sure.
The creative aspect. You don't even freaking paint the miniatures. No one else paints the miniatures. You're like, where's the creativity?
Yeah. So once you had your full of...
There's net lists all over the place. Like there's no missions. You're just like, there's one thing to do here, and you can just come up with one way of doing it. The creativity is just so low. Competitiveness aspect of that game was really fun because you're trying to like outplay the opponent. What are they going to do? How are you going to counter it? How do you like double counter them? That part's cool for the game, and its accessibility really good. Creativity like at the very bottom of the pack.
Yeah, I think there's a thing with that in terms of in general when you are playing a game. Sometimes you just a game really hits you. You play it a lot, and then you are just kind of had your fill.
Yeah, that could be it. Like the cool things it had going on with its mechanics, you feel like you explored those. And that's that.
Yeah, and so like it's like I think this happens a lot with board games for people, right? They play a lot of that board game, and then once you've played it enough, like you look at it inside and out, you understand it, you have some good memories, let's say, of playing it. But when you play it out, how much more is it giving you, right?
Yep.
And if it's not necessarily giving you a lot, right, especially with board games, because you have your board game group, so you don't have to lose the community, you just move on to a next board game, right? And so sometimes just the game is just like you've had enough of it and you just move on, and you don't have to feel guilty about that. But I think with board games, because they have there's not this creative experience, you don't have as much sadness having played a game out to a point where you're like, oh, I'm done with this game, right? Whereas with miniature games, I think there's an issue where people don't want to move on because they've sunk so much time and effort in painting and getting that thing on the table. It seems like such a waste and terrible to be like, oh, I'm never going to play this game again, or I'm right, because of how much effort I put into making this army look cool, right? So how do you deal with that, right? And how do you get over that in terms of miniature games?
Oh, you don't.
So that you're okay with walking away.
You just play skirmish games. That's because those big games that have like 100 figures. Yeah, I think I might have a problem walking away from those. Like, because my Warhammer 40K
So don't invest as much in the hobby thing and spread out that investment, right? You don't have to put in, you don't have to walk away from 10. I guess it's the equivalent, right? Like a skirmish game might have, 8 to 20 guys, 8 to 15 guys kind of thing. Right, for a normal skirmish game, and then you have to have 5 or 10 times that for a Games Workshop game. So the idea of like playing, but you're not necessarily spending more time playing the game, right, in terms of number of games. So like you can walk away from one skirmish game, but it doesn't feel nearly as bad because that's 1/5 of the effort you put into getting that game on the table.
Yeah. So it fits into our whole.
ethos.
Whole ethos of don't play giant war games. It doesn't matter what the game is. It doesn't matter how fun it is. Like, it can trap you. It's just dangerous. It's a dangerous thing to mess with.
Yeah, and you have this like feelings of guilt. I would say, yeah, it's true. When to walk away. Don't even start those games.
Yeah, kids, don't do drugs. The
right
drug
before
here is giant battle miniature games.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Just do a few drugs. Don't do too many. And too many is you're going to overdose if you do those games.
Yeah. So that's fair. That's fair. I think that definitely helps. I'd say also being okay with keeping a little bit of those miniatures and putting them on your shelf, and having some enjoyment on, the miniatures on your shelf, as opposed to only getting that enjoyment when you put them on the table. I think when you enjoy looking at your models on your shelf, then you don't feel a waste when you walk away from them as much, because you have a couple of them there.
Mm-hmm. I'm not a person who puts miniatures on shelves, except a couple. If you're watching the YouTube video, they're behind my head.
I know, exactly. I'm just like, I don't do it except for, these miniatures that are on my shelf as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So X-Wing, you feel like we just experienced all it had to offer in general?
Yeah, I guess it was more like you described, the board game experience of how people interact with a board game. I think, we basically just dabbled in it like we dabble in a board game.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like there's a bunch of other games that, I got into, dipped a toe into, and then walked away. I think sometimes it is just, experiencing it, getting enough of that experience and walking away. That's, like, you don't have to get in depth with everything, right? And I think, like we mentioned before, you don't have to walk away with the idea that you'll never come back, even if you never do come back, right?
Yeah, it's rare the game comes back on its own. So
yeah, but like I have a lot of games with a lot of models where I have an army painted out, or even two armies, and they're just there. And the idea, like a lot of board games or something, is that when I want to, I could pick it out and say, hey, let's play it, right? And then get a friend and we could go and play it, right? But I don't do that, even though I could, and that's fine. So if you look at it like empirically, when I'm dead in the ground, you could be like, oh, I never played that game ever again. But in my head, it's just another game in the staple that I could pull out, right? It's just that I never had the desire to do it.
Okay.
And I think that's fine. It's a lot easier to do when they're skirmish games, and the models that you did is like 20 models can fit in a box, right? As opposed to if I have giant army level games and I have to have like a really big box to keep all the models there, that's a lot more painful to do, right?
Yeah, no, I like getting rid of that stuff. I got to get rid of some more of those big model games. But I'm okay with. I think you should just keep, if they're a big game, maybe keep one army for it. So if like a similar rule set comes out, you've got a whole army for it. But like if you're out of the game, maybe just pare it down to one army or something that you really like the look of, and a few like you said, other miniatures you just like the look of.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely a good advice for when you decide to walk away. So I think we mentioned a lot of different reasons in hindsight, I think, why we walked away. Do we have like warning signs or something that when you look at a game, when you're experiencing a game, you're really into a game, that kind of tells you, hey man, this is about the time. Maybe you should reevaluate this game and consider whether you should move on or not?
Yeah, I don't know how to put this not harshly, but when you feel like a lot of the people who are in the community, you just don't particularly like them that much. You're like, these aren't my people.
Okay.
So
that's an interesting point.
I think that's the early warning sign as far as I can think of one.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I would say I wouldn't say it in exactly the same way. I would say there's two things.
Well, just your goals are different than their goals.
Yeah, so I would say if, when you're in a community, there's certain people that you really gel with, and there's certain people that you don't, right? And the people that you gel with, you'll just become like friends, right? The other guys that are in your community, they, you're like friendly, right? You're more acquaintance, you're as opposed to actual friends. Like you wouldn't necessarily want to invite them for a barbecue that had nothing to do with the game. When those people are no longer aligned with you, or when the game doesn't get you to have an enjoyable time playing with these people over the differences that you guys actually have, that is an issue where that is telling you maybe you're not enjoying the game as much. And right, I'd say the other thing though is sometimes you enjoy your community, you like all the people in it, but you still feel a drain on playing, right? And to me, this is one of those things where you're like, you show up for game night, but you're like, oh, I don't really want to play. I'll just, sit here, talk and stuff like that, and wait for everyone to finish up and go eat, right? And I think that's one of those things where when you look at that and you're saying, oh, maybe there's something missing in the way that I played this game, and then you might want to reevaluate that, right? But if you like the community, sometimes the community will drag you back, right?
Yep.
And then sometimes you're just burnt out, right? And that's a temporary walking away, right? Where you just need to rest that game. Maybe you've kind of overdosed on the game for a little while and you need time to go away. But sometimes it really is. You're just like, oh, I'm done with this game. And if you like the community, that's the hardest.
Yeah, like if you're in the game, you can often figure out, oh, like I'm done with this army. I feel like trying this creative outlet of trying another army, trying this different way of playing the game. Usually that's pretty obvious once you're into a game because you know how all the factions play. But yeah, when you feel like it's the whole game that's not your cup of tea, then yeah, you feel like going and looking for another one.
Yeah, so then I guess for us, because the community playing outside of just you and I or our friends at each other's houses, right, is such an important part.
Yep.
When the community of the game we're playing doesn't have that becomes an issue with the game as well. And like we said, maybe we even like the game, but if you don't have the community, it just ends up sitting on your shelf, right? And
yeah,
that's
like
okay.
it all depends on what you are looking for as a gamer. Like we look for a lot of aspects of what war games can offer. Like we want there to be a community with the game. We want there to be a good community outlet or a good creative outlet possible in building the miniatures of that game. We want like the game to be accessible so you can get it on the board. You can actually get a game in without having to like bring a car full of miniatures and play for 7 hours. Like all aspects, we want the game to be accessible. We can do with a little less competition, but we don't we still enjoy there to be like a way.
Yeah, we're not playing co-ops.
No, we're not. No, I want to play co-ops. You want to be able to like show your opponent who's the master, but not like no, you don't need to be the master of the entire
in a
universe.
friendly ribbing. Yeah.
So
yeah, it's true. We don't hate co-ops. It's just that's never going to be our main game.
No. So we're demanding a lot of like the aspects that miniature games can offer, but maybe there's people out there who just want to be able to get that creative outlet in. And if maybe they're the 40K players who want this crazy army project, but they don't care about the community quite as much. They just want to be like say, oh, I want 2 tournaments a year to show off my army and like the new pieces I added. Maybe that's perfectly fine with them, and they can just have their one bit of it that's their creative outlet, and they're good. So you got to figure out what you want individually out of like all the different things that miniatures could offer you, and then see
the alternatives, right? Because maybe there's, like I said, like if you don't have a community, you like the people around. Maybe the alternatives are not as good, and you'll just continue playing a game that you're not so into just because all your friends play it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, honestly. I would say though, you should try to convince your friends to play a different game.
Which we did do with Warmachine.
That's actually true. I didn't do it. I was the one that was dragged along because I liked my miniatures. I still liked the hobby aspect, and I had like fully dialed out of trying to play competitively. And then, but other people were just like, hey, what about this game? And I'm like, oh, I guess those miniatures are kind of cool. I guess I'll buy a couple. Oh. And then, a couple of years, we were all playing Infinity.
Well, you were with me when I bought more Warmachine like 3 weeks ago, just because I'm like, this would be cool for skirmish games. I'm like, yep. Still keep buying it, even though it's out of production, which is kind of why I bought it. Like, well, now or never.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things when you start playing in the wider aspect of games. I think this is one of, I guess, maybe the most important things about games is that it's fine that why we've become so much more okay with walking away from games is when you have a community that is more okay with trying out different things and playing different stuff, you never lose the community aspect. And so you can shuffle the games around all the time, and you don't have to worry about losing that community or finding someone to play. And this is why I think in general, skirmish games and finding that community that just likes, miniature gaming in general, and that has a wider palette of games is such a reward, honestly. And I don't even know if this is going to continue forever, right? But this is just kind of what we have right now. We're playing a whole bunch of different games. There's a game store where a bunch of people just enjoy miniature games in general, and we can walk away from a game, but we don't have to walk away from the community, and that is the best in my opinion, right? Because like you said, we have so many different things that we want from the game, and community is like the hardest one, in my opinion, to get and maintain with, right? And I think a lot of people end up playing games they don't really like because they want the community aspect, right? How many people say, oh, the best thing about 40K is that you can actually get a game in?
Yep, it's a real thing.
Yeah, so anything else we wanted to go through?
I don't know. We could go back to whether you think there's another game that, died a spectacular death that we never played. None comes to mind off the top of my head. But
Dropfleet Commander we played, and that unfortunately died.
I don't even know if that got off the ground. It kickstarted.
I painted 1.5 full armies. I played a bunch of games. We played a bunch, and then it died because of the terrible. There's a whole bunch of things that happen.
I'm trying to figure out what category that falls into. It's
I really like my ships.
I know they're really cool, but I think the game. I don't know if you want to categorize it under the broad umbrella of accessibility, where just playing the game was. It's hard to even describe this because so few games.
I think the game. There were so many good things about the game.
I know, but there's also so many very not working aspects of the game.
Yeah.
So, just the accessibility of getting a game in that would be playable,
Man, I should put some of those ships on my shelf. And that was the game that got us to start making games, because we made our own spaceship game, which is still freaking awesome, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, because certain aspects of the rules were so clearly unworkable that we're like, this is so obvious of how you just remove this aspect and put some better system in. Yeah. Actually,
there was a couple of people who played that game at our store, actually. So it is a thing. You didn't sell it off, did you?
No. But luckily, they're not very big.
Yeah.
They're pretty small. Man. They're pretty small on the plastic.
I still want that battle cruiser, but it's so expensive.
I think
it's like $90 or $100. It's only going to get more expensive because of inflation. I should have bought it before, but I want that whale battle cruiser for the PHR.
Yeah, I have the UCM battle cruiser. I'm still like, this is so cool.
You bought it?
Yeah, you were there when I bought it. We were at one of the stores we occasionally go to, and just to support the store, I got it because we were playing there. It's cool.
Oh man, I should buy it.
No, you shouldn't.
Only one I can buy.
No, you shouldn't. Mine just sits in plastic. Don't do that.
You know what? Plastic. I actually haven't finished my what are the guys called? The bad guys. I was gonna say the purple guys. Oh, they are purple. I painted my guys purple, and they are purple. What are those guys called?
Is it the
Scourge? No, the Scourge.
Yes.
What a interesting name. I was gonna say bad and terrible, but okay, it's fine.
Yeah, this podcast is about when to walk away from the game, not when to sell off your
No,
miniatures. We haven't figured out that
I
part.
can't walk away. We've done that, and I was like, I painted all these beautiful miniatures. I would need to play this game, and literally, we're not gonna play it. We're just gonna talk about it. You know what? Some of the best things about walking away from the game, you can, and keeping the miniatures as opposed to selling them off, is you can constantly talk about how you're going to play the game, but you never actually have to play the game.
Yeah, well, usually I keep my miniatures in nice foam trays, and games I don't play, the miniatures just sort of get thrown in a pile, not like magnetized anything, not in foam. They're just like in this pile.
I'm definitely gonna take some. I really like them. I had a nice yellow to like pink, purple transition on my PHR with a brown. Oh man, they look great.
Yeah, I don't even know if I finished any ships. Anyways, I got the color scheme going. It was also like yellow and white.
Yeah, this is a terrible example showing that I have no ability to walk away from games. I think I'm very glad that our games are so much smaller because as I can't walk away from games, and I even am recommending not walking away, you need smaller games so you can actually have the closet space to fit all of these boxes of games.
Yeah, this just goes back to reinforce my thing, like, kids, don't get into giant games. It is, even between us who have gone through all the points of like why to stay in, why not to stay in, where like these big games are just too dangerous.
Yeah, this is why like miniature games has to be my main hobby, because otherwise it's too expensive to have different hobbies. Because I don't throw away my games and resell them and get new stuff. I'm just like, okay, I'm now walking away from that to start something new, but I still have that in a box. So.
Well, to be fair, by the time we walk away from games, nobody else is really in the game, so they're basically unsellable.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, I guess that's possibly true. I do have, honestly, I think the biggest thing is I don't feel like I ever have to walk away from games, like I said, just because of our community, right? I think that's the biggest thing. Like, even with Drop Fleet, like for Drop Fleet, let's say we never, because we actually have written a game like that can use those models, we don't have to walk away from fully, but like we could sell everything except for the models that we need to play our game, right? But I don't do that because our community we know that our community sometimes has people that, if I ask a couple of people, they might be like, yeah, sure, I'll play a game, because they have miniatures and I could actually play it. That is something that is amazing, right? Like at our store, people even played like Mordheim, right? They're going to have a second Mordheim campaign. And I'm like, well, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, even for dead games, still around.
They can come back. It just needs 10, 20 years. And then nostalgia is a hell of a drug.
Yeah. Anyways, you can keep the miniatures, but get out of the game at the very least. All right. I think that sums up our
ideas.
Points.
Yeah. In conclusion, never walk away. Just shelve it for the time being. That's my philosophy. And what's yours? In conclusion.
Don't play huge war games.
Don't even get into them at the beginning. Choose better. Have a more discerning palette.
Yeah,
and then the other thing is
those are the only games I've actually gotten rid of. Like I got rid of my 40K. It took up so much space. It had to go.
Yeah. Yeah, you have like 5 miniatures now from them. Can you count them on your fingers, or do you have more than 10?
At least there's at least 100.
You still have 100 40K miniatures?
We're going back to 2nd edition now. We keep counting. Like, let's not get into this.
Okay, fair enough.
I said it took up a lot of space.
I sold all of my 40K except for 100 miniatures.
Yeah, that's getting rid of 200 miniatures. That's a lot.
That's hilarious. Oh man. All right. Well, there you go. Secretly, Brandon is somewhat just as bad as me. And then the last thing, get that good community, man. Find a good community, and you never have to walk away from a game fully again.
Yeah.
When it's not your choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think that's basically it. I think we've gone through everything. Maybe I would have wanted to concentrate more about the emotional aspects to help you realize that your game is abusive, but maybe we'll save that for another podcast for another day. when to realize your game is abusing you should be a great other topic.
Yeah, we'll see what angle we take on that one versus the positive aspects you can get out of a game and their flip sides. We'll see what angle that one happens from.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you have any thoughts, questions, ideas, or games that you want to just reminisce about how you had to walk away from it, give us a shout. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at contact@diceovereverything.com.
Or find us on Facebook. We're Dice Over Everything.
This has been Alan.
It's been Brandon.
Bye.